What's going on, guys? So to kick off our GCSE Psychology series, we're going to be starting off with processes of memory, which is right at the beginning of your GCSE curriculum. So let's start by defining what memory is. So according to the Dictionary of Psychology produced by Oxford University Press, memory is the psychological function of preserving information involving the processes of encoding, storage, and retrieval. The key processes within this are encoding, which is the transforming of sensory input into a form that can be stored, storage, maintaining information over time, and of course retrieval, which is accessing and using that stored information. So in essence, encoding is when we take in that information through our senses, so it could be through our sight, smell, taste, and touch, storing it, so holding it in a space which is in our memory, and then retrieving it, so going and getting it when we need it. So let's look at these all in a little more detail. Encoding. So what is encoding? Again, back to our Dictionary of Psychology produced by Oxford. Encoding is the converting of information into a different form of representation, especially in psychology, the process whereby physical sensory information is transformed into a representation suitable for storage in memory and subsequent retrieval. There are different types of encoding, so there isn't just one key way of encoding information. Our brains encode and incorporate information in different ways. We've got visual encoding. So of course, visual is to do with vision, it's to do with sight, right? So this is converting images or scenes. Example, remembering a picture or a face. Acoustic encoding, so as you guys have probably guessed, is to do with sound. So converting sound, so remembering a song or a melody. You guys know how easy it is to remember, the lyrics to your favorite song, right? Semantic encoding, so this one might be a little difficult to remember because it doesn't automatically strike an image as visual or acoustic might. But semantic encoding is simply converting meaning, often the most effective. Example, remembering the meaning of words rather than their exact appearance or sound. So what they actually mean rather than just what they look like or what they sound like. So let's look at some different models of memory. The first one that we're going to look at is the Levels of Processing model by Craik and Lockhart, 1972. So according to Craik and Lockhart, memory is a byproduct of perceptual analysis. The more deeply information is processed, the higher the likelihood of retention. Semantic is the deepest level according to Craik and Lockhart. Shallow processing is the basic perceptual features, example, the appearance of a word. Deep processing is that semantic processing. So back to that word that we just looked at, semantic. Example, thinking about the meaning of a word. Deep processing leads to better long-term retention. So to kind of sum this theory up is that the more that we process information or the more that we think or focus on that information equates to a deeper level of processing. And the deeper that we process information, the easier it is to remember. Storage. So we've looked at encoding, now storage. What is storage? So storage is the act or process of storing anything, especially in psychology, storing encoded information for subsequent retrieval. So holding it in that place to go back and get it again at a later date. So what are some of the models of memory? So again, models, theories, or perspectives are ways of looking at a specific thing. And in this instance, they're ways of looking at and understanding memory. So we've got the multi-store memory model, which was posited by Atkinson and Schifrin in 1968. We've got the working memory model, Baddeley and Hitch, 1974. So let's start off by looking at the multi-store model, or the MSM, Atkinson and Schifrin, 1968. So according to the multi-store memory model, there are different storage systems which we use. So starting off with, we have sensory memory, which is memory that is used from just our senses. So very brief, this is up to about a few milliseconds. It stores sensory impressions. Example, iconic memory for visual input, echoic memory for auditory input. So anything that we use our senses to identify with. Short-term memory, or STM. It's a limited capacity of 7, give or take 1 or 2 items, with a duration of up to 30 seconds. Information must be rehearsed to prevent decay. So we're going to look at a visualization of this model a little later to give us an even better understanding of it. Long-term memory, LTM. Potentially unlimited capacity and duration. LTM is divided into explicit, conscious, and implicit unconscious memory. So of course, explicit, conscious, things that are right at the forefront, we know what they mean, we understand them, whereas implicit or unconscious memory are things that are more buried deeply within our minds. Let's have a look at what this looks like in as a visual. So right at the bottom, we've got the information which is lost or forgotten. So to start off with, we have our sensory store, which is, again, that is what we take in with our senses, so we have that sensory input. We touch something, we see something, we smell something, we taste something. If we pay attention to this, so we're focusing on it, we pay attention to this, then it potentially gets put through to our short-term store. So our short-term memory storage, our STM. Now, if we don't pay attention to this, then that information is lost through the process of forgetting. If we're rehearsing what is in our short-term memory, then it gets transferred to our long-term store through a process of consolidation. And through consolidation, it gets passed on to our long-term store. So think of it like different storage systems, right? So we've got our sensory storage, and in that sensory storage, it only lasts for a few milliseconds. If we pay attention to it, then it moves on to our short-term store, which is, again, a limited capacity, roughly 7, give or take 1 or 2 items. And then from that, again, if we rehearse that, if we continue to think about it, then it gets consolidated through that process of consolidation into our long-term memory. And the long-term memory store is potentially unlimited. And at any time that we need to remember this information, which is within our long-term store, then we have to go through that process of retrieval. So we have to go into our long-term memory store and bring it to our short-term memory store so we can then recall it. And of course, if we don't rehearse it, if we don't think on it, if we don't need to retrieve that information, then it is possible that we can lose that information through the process of forgetting. What about a working memory model, WMM? Badley and Hitch, 1974. Slightly different. So according to the working memory model, there are different areas that deal with different things. So starting off with our central executive. Our central executive kind of sits at the top of our memory model within the working memory model and acts as a kind of like the boss that decides on where different pieces of information go. So our central executive oversees attention and coordinates information from the other components. Our phonological loop stores auditory information, so anything to do with sound. Our visual spatial sketchpad deals with visual and spatial information, so if we need to navigate somewhere. And our episodic buffer, which was added later, so this wasn't in the original working memory model, this was added later. The episodic buffer integrates information from different sources into a coherent episode. So it can take visual information, spatial information, alongside auditory information to create an episode. And through that episode, that is then within our episodic buffer. So again, let's look at what this looks like visually. So the working memory model. Right at the top, we have our central executive. And our central executive decides where information goes. So we get information in through our sensory inputs. And our central executive decides whether it will go to our phonological loop, our visual spatial sketchpad, or our later added episodic buffer. Through that process of consolidation, and it then moves on to our long-term knowledge system. So it updates that knowledge system the more that these are rehearsed and the more that these are understood. So what are types of long-term memory? Because we've been using that terminology for a bit now, long-term memory. What are the different types of long-term memory? Well, we've got 2 different categories, explicit and implicit memories. So within our explicit memories, we have episodic memory. And as it kind of gives it away in the title, episodic memory is all to do with episodes, right? So personal experiences or events, things like your first day of school, your first day of college, your first day of uni. These are episodes in our lives that we'll remember. Hopefully they're not just filler episodes, but they're actual, canon episodes that mean something to the story of our lives. We have semantic memory. Semantic memory is all to do with things like general knowledge and facts. So, you guys are watching this video, you guys are trying to probably revise, trying to learn new things when you're going through to study your GCSEs. So there are going to be certain things that you need to add to your semantic memories, which will be in adding to your general knowledge and things like the facts. So things like the names of who invented the working memory model. Our implicit memory. So things like procedural memories. So things like riding a bike, how to perform tasks. Could be how to fry an egg, riding a bike. Priming. Unconscious influence of previous experiences on behavior. Retrieval. So what is retrieval? Well, retrieval is the act or process of retrieving anything, especially in psychology, the act or process of recovering encoded information from storage in memory and bringing it into consciousness. So maybe going into our long-term memory stores, which might be buried within our subconscious, bringing it right back to the forefront into our conscious memory. So what are the different types of retrieval? Recall. So retrieving information without cues. So answering a short answer question. Somebody might ask you a question, how old is your older sibling, or how old is your younger sibling? You can recall that information, you can retrieve it without any kind of cue. Recognition. So you guys ever done a multiple choice question? You may see an answer within that you recognize it. You think, oh wait, actually I know where that seems like that's the right answer, because you recognize it. So identifying previously learned information with cues. Example, answering a multiple choice question. What are some of the factors that might affect retrieval? Well, retrieval cues. Hints or prompts that trigger memory retrieval. For example, smells, sounds, or other sensory cues can help retrieve memories. Sometimes you might be trying to remember, the name of a study, or the name of a person, and you might see something that reminds you of them. Somebody might be called John Taylor, and you go past a place that sells suits, and you think, oh yeah, Taylor, that was a guy's name, John Taylor. So something that gives you a kind of hint that prompts that memory to come back to the forefront. Context-dependent memory. Memory is easier to recall in the same environment in which it was encoded. Example, revisiting your childhood home brings back memories. Again, this is something that you might realize. You might go, sit an exam, and you might find it really difficult to retrieve any of the information. But then when you're back at home, in your bedroom where you've been revising, then you can recall the information a lot easier. Could be based on the context-dependent memory. So memory is easier to recall in the same environment in which it was encoded. State-dependent memory, very similar to context-dependent memory, but this is all to do with the state of mind that you were in. So memory retrieval is easier when in the same emotional or physiological state. Learning while happy, easier to recall when happy. Again, something to think about when you're revising for your exams. Try and get into a calm state of mind, and then hopefully when you guys go in to sit your exams, you can bring back that same state of mind and find it a little easier to record some of the information. What about retrieval failures? What about when we fail to retrieve that information? Tip of the tongue phenomenon. You guys ever experienced this? Probably. So feeling that retrieval is imminent but not successful. If you ever tried to remember something, might be the name of something, or the location of something, and it's right there, right on the tip of your tongue, but you just can't manage to remember where it is. This is known as the tip of the tongue phenomenon. Interference theory. So this is another theory. Proactive interference. So what is proactive interference? Old information interferes with the recall of new information. So it might be a thing whereby you're trying to remember something that you've learned, which has updated a memory that you had, or updated information that you previously had, but the old information, what you had from before, continually kind of comes to the forefront, and you find it difficult to recall that new information because the old information is so prominent in your mind. Retroactive interference is the opposite of that. So proactive and retroactive, where with retroactive interference, the new information interferes with the recall of old information. So when you're trying to recall what it was, it's difficult because what is so close to the front of your memory. So that's the end of the first of our videos, GCSE Psychology Revision. The next one will also be about memory, so make sure that you guys tune in for that one. Hopefully this gives you a better understanding of some of the processes of memory, and you guys enjoy this GCSE format, and stay tuned for the next one. Catch you guys later. Peace.